Mr. Freud 100 years ago, we being so clever in our modern European culture. But in fact, these amazing Indians, and it's only really now, 50 years later, since Dalai Lama's been around, the Tibetan Buddhists have been around, that now scientists are really paying attention to this incredible geniuses, you know, with so much literature now being published in the West, in English. So anyway, Atisha, what he did was, he took the essential points from all this vast body of knowledge, from all the metaphysics, from the meditation, from the psychology, from the philosophy, from the epistemology, all of it. He took the essential points and he presented them in a very specific way. He presented them to be listened to and experienced. Not just as philosophy, but as experience. And he also presented in an orderly way, which is very evident of any body of knowledge you ever study. We all know perfectly well in our culture, you start in the beginning stuff, the simple stuff, you go to the middle stuff, you go to the advanced stuff, and then you graduate. We get that. But I think one of the biggest problems, and certainly for myself then, hearing it and all those years working with it, even editing these teachings, you know, we don't think of spiritual teachings like that. We just think of spiritual teachings, I think, as kind of fairly random, these pop-up things. We certainly think it's all about compassion, and it is that. But from the Buddhist point of view, for example, compassion, this is the most advanced. That's the great scope. So as I like to call these, and I've done it in this book, you know, these course notes that we're using, which were, as I said, I taught at LMB in 2005, and which are the course notes for this module, and which we put together as a nice book for the November course. I mean, I called it very purposely a very simple, and it is a very simple, my presentation is a very simple presentation of this Lam Rim from junior school to postgraduate. Now I find, of course it's kind of colloquial, but I find that extremely helpful for my mind. Even still, when I hear lowest scope teachings, I can't quite get it. But when I hear it's junior school, we get it. It's the first lot. Then you go to high school. That's the middle scope. And then you go to university. That's the compassion wing. That's the compassion wing. That's the bodhisattva path. So as soon as you hear that bodhisattva path, compassion, is university level, you immediately can't avoid knowing it's a more advanced teaching. But that's a surprise to us, because we just think it's all about compassion, you know. And it is. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, compassion, though, is not enough. You've got to have the wisdom. And this is this wonderful analogy that I repeat repeatedly, which is Buddhist analogy, which is a way of framing the whole path, is a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So the compassion wing is essentially junior school and high school, the lower scope and the middle scope. Okay, if you completed the wisdom wing, if you're going to graduate at high school, if you're going to graduate at the middle scope, you'd be a Hinayana practitioner. These are the teachings and practices you'd learn in Burma or Thailand, essentially. And you would then complete your practices of renunciation, and you would then add to this concentration meditation, where you would then realize emptiness, and then you would achieve your own nirvana in one life or another, and you'd be out of here, baby, and will not come back. But what happens here in this Lam Rim presentation, which is the entire Mahayana path, which includes the compassion wing, which includes the university level, the great scope, the concentration, and which is actually a Hindu teaching, and emptiness, that's a Theravadan teaching, that's a Hinayana teaching. They are not taught there. They're taught in the framework of the six perfections of the Bodhisattva, which is the most advanced level of the compassion wing, for various reasons, and we'll go into this. So anyway, it's the wisdom wing is junior school and high school, great lower scope and great scope. Then you've got compassion wing, which is lower scope and middle scope. Then you've got the great scope, university level. Why not? And of course, as we know, being Tibetan Buddhists, then you've got the Vajrayana, and that you might as well call that postgraduate. Why not? You know, it just somehow is immediate because we recognize these concepts. And indeed, the term Lam Rim, technically path, gradual, why not call it a course? It is in fact a course. And you graduate as a Buddha. It's just that this course takes a few lifetimes, you know, that's all. But it sort of makes it understandable to it. I mean, of course it's a colloquial, but I find it so helpful for my mind. So I'll be saying these words repeatedly. junior school, high school, wisdom wing, compassion wing, because it's a way of putting them all together, all these components together. So again, the other thing, I remember reading this in the Lam Rim, but I didn't know what they're talking about. I couldn't get it, but I vividly remembered it. Pabonka Rinpoche would say it. So for example, if you were studying math and you got a big fat course book of maths or music or any body of knowledge, and you got a big fat course book and you'd open the page randomly anywhere, let's say music, you're studying the piano, and you open up a page randomly, you would immediately recognize pretty much what level that was. You'd go, oh, well, I'm not to that level yet. That's grade 7. I'm only grade 2. Or you'd go, oh, I'm past that one. I'm grade 12. That's only grade 7. You'd know immediately where that music fit in the big picture. That, again, is exactly what we understand when it comes to any level of knowledge. And we grade ourselves in that way. It's so necessary to do that. And equally, it's very helpful because then you feel like you're getting somewhere. Wow, I've just passed grade 1, mummy. Grade 1, you feel so excited because you've just achieved something. So now you go to the next. And you keep making it more difficult and more comprehensive and more profound. That's just the way it goes. So it's crucial to understand this. So it's exactly the same with the Dharma. I remember Pabonka Rinpoche saying this, but I still couldn't quite get it, the implication of it. That you open any Dharma book, and if you know the Lam Rim reasonably well, you'll be able to recognize, wow, that's a junior school teaching, that's lower scope, that's middle scope, that's great scope, that's Vajrayana. You would know immediately. And if you couldn't pin it down and put it into one of those levels, if you think, well, it doesn't belong to any of them, well, I'm telling you, it wouldn't be Buddhism. If you can't locate that piece of music and know where it fits, that means it's not music. It has to fit in that package. It's really coherent, And like I said, we're not used to thinking of spiritual practice like this. And certainly when we think of philosophy, we don't necessarily think of spiritual practice. And then we think of psychology, and we don't think of spiritual practice. Or if we think of epistemology, we don't think of spiritual practice. But this is the point in Buddhism that's really central to Buddhism, and I would suggest pretty unique. That if it can't be, that that's spiritual, if it's not spiritual, it doesn't exist there. And another way to put it is this. We have incredible knowledge in our culture. We're unbelievable geniuses, especially scientific. That's the top level of our knowledge. We truly admire these great thinkers. You could have the most genius person with genius wisdom. We call it wisdom about the universe, about math, about physics, you name it, about music, artists as well, the greatest artists in the universe. But that person would still go home and beat up their children and husband. Because the knowledge we get in our world, scientific and artistic even, has got no relationship to ethics. This is what's truly fascinating. And this is the point for the Buddha. So you could say that absolutely Buddhism is a presentation of ethics. It is definitely a presentation of how to stop ignorance and get wisdom. Equally, it is a presentation of spiritual practice. And equally, it is a presentation of how to get happy and how to stop suffering. And each of these is a doorway into the same knowledge. And so for the Buddha to have wisdom and not have ethics, that's schizophrenic. It's not a possibility. It would be in the head only. That would be like knowing every recipe in the planet, but you wouldn't have a clue how to make a cake. It would be demented, So it's got to be based in ethics. It's got to be experiential. It's got to be practiced, and it's got to lead you out of suffering into happiness. So you could argue the one way to frame all of it is as a method for stopping suffering and getting wisdom. It is absolutely a method for stopping suffering and getting wisdom. Stopping suffering, and getting happiness. But the method, this is a crucial point for the Buddha, the method for stopping suffering and getting happiness is getting wisdom. Quitting ignorance and getting wisdom. Because Buddha's analysis across the board is the extent to which we are caught up in ignorance is the extent to which we suffer, and therefore the extent to which we have crummy ethics, and therefore the extent to which we harm others. So the method for getting happy and the method for stopping suffering is to get wisdom. This is really powerful to remember. And when we can start, so for me, I can say all these words now fairly simply. I mean, I don't have much, I haven't studied that much. I've studied a little bit, nothing like these Geshis. I haven't studied as much as Venerable G. Palmo, She's done more study than I have. I've done little bits and pieces over the years. But the little bit I do know, what I've really found now so beneficial is to have kind of a feeling for the whole package of these teachings. And the wish I have is to try and show us how it is only experiential. How philosophy, metaphysics, psychology, meditation, epistemology all come to the same thing. They all come down to something you take in your mind to transform it in order for you to get rid of rubbish, to develop your marvelous potential, and then, of course, to practice the compassion wing, which is to help others. So the wisdom wing is really all the nuts and bolts of these amazing teachings of the Buddha about the way things exist. That's his trip, you know. That's his expertise, the way things exist. And then his expertise is, and that's karma, and then his expertise is the way the mind functions. I mean, we would never think, oh yeah, Buddha, his expertise is the mind. We think, oh, he's a meditator, and we think it's something weird and kind of mystical and, you know, and spiritual. But he's a brilliant psychologist, and I'm not being funny, you know. As I said, even these Indians before him. I mean, Buddha went as far as he could go with these amazing Indians before, these incredible thinkers and geniuses, philosophers and metaphysicians, whatever the word is, and thinkers and practitioners. They're the ones who created this amazing technique, this brilliant psychological skill that we really only start to learn in high school, in the middle scope, which, you know, it's single-pointed concentration, samadhi, or calm abiding as it's known, shamatha. This genius, incredible, sophisticated skill that enables us to completely harness our own chaotic mind. There's nothing vaguely equivalent in modern neuroscience or modern psychology. And it's only really now people are starting to see this, you know. And even then, when we do know about it, we're pretty cliched about it. We think, oh, it's all about mindfulness. It's about the best we can say, you know. But it's extremely sophisticated, incredible method, psychological skill that we can use, and people like you and me right now are living in the mountains metaphorically or actually accomplishing this single-pointed concentration. It's a living thoroughly extant, has not died out at all, totally living, and it's more than 3,000 years old. It was well before the Buddha. So of course he took that, and so many of the views, he didn't throw out what he got from all those amazing Hindus. He went as far as he could go, and he said, no, there's further to go. So that was where he diverged in his own direction, specifically in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self and the universe, in fact. That's the ultimate of the wisdom teachings, which we learn in the university level. And we're going to talk about concentration. That comes in high school. So what's the very first? I mean, you know, I can't possibly teach the Lamrim the way it's taught by Geshe Sopa and all those people with all the endless preliminary practices. I won't even go into those, okay? I won't even go into them. I'm just going to give a very simple presentation. It's the best I can do. And I think, you know, and there's all the other texts there for those who want to study it seriously, just to try and touch on these essential points, to try and show experientially how we apply these stages of practice in our life. And so then when we know what level we are at, we know what tools we can use. This is crucial. This is the main learning from understanding the Lamrim, to recognize where you're at, what's your level of capability, you know. Insofar as using these tools from your kit bag in daily life, which is the point of all of this stuff. So you could argue the essence, experientially in day-to-day life, the essence of the first scope of practice is to control our body and speech, our behavior. This is where ethics gets taught in detail. The details of Lord Buddha's amazing observation of the universe, which is this law of karma. These Indians before him had observed it. He didn't make this up. He wasn't the first one to discover it. And this is the crucial point too we have to remember. So even before we begin, let's remind ourselves what this person called Buddha, what is he? Where did this information come from? And this is really crucial. I always quote this, I always say, in a joke, but it's true, we all ask the same questions. On this planet, every question we've asked, I can see in different cultures, everything. We ask all the questions repeatedly. But there's one that only one person has ever asked. It was very curious. It was a man in Nelson in New Zealand. And he was a scientist. In fact, he was a scientist. And his question was very clear. It was so fascinating. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? So I said to him, well, would you ask who revealed the teachings to Einstein? Of course we wouldn't. And they all laughed, of course, because that's what we assume about Buddhism, that it's religion. And we know necessarily that religious philosophy comes from on high. It's coming from the creator. Most major religious philosophical viewpoints assert a being called God who's a creator. Well, Buddha does not assert such a thing. He says we don't need creating babies. We do fine making our own mess, and we can, how amazing, do well creating our own happiness. This is a very shocking concept in the West. I mean, that's a shock to hear. You know, if I tell Muslims and devoted Muslims and Christians that they pray for me, like taxi drivers, and ask me about what I think, and this nice gentleman, a Muslim gentleman or a Christian gentleman, they tell me I'm going to go to hell, and they'll pray for me. And I say, well, thank you very much. Please pray for me. What can I say, you know? It's a shocking concept to think there's no creator. It's like being a communist, you know? So anyway, this is the point for the Buddha. So I said to him, this is really, even though we are now, many of us are Buddhists, we still find it hard to think this through, you know? Because we have this utter belief, this assumption that things like reincarnation can't possibly be proved. Because why? Because we have an assumption that the mind is the brain, that conceptuality is about the best we can do, and that we know perfectly well a brain does not go from a past life, it turns into yuck in the ground. So we just have this deep assumption that brain and conceptuality and sensory consciousness equals mind. So it's really shocking to hear that no, Buddha has a view of the mind that it's more extensive, more subtle, and quite different. So to even begin, we need to be super clear about this, you know, because everything that goes on in Buddhism is in the mind. So first of all, Buddha is not a creator. He does not posit a creator. He says we don't even need creating. Therefore, if we think that through, where does this knowledge come from? Well, you know, if you read a cookbook, if it's an authentic cookbook, you know perfectly well that knowledge has to be either he quotes his mother's recipes and he thanks his mum and says, I'm not a cook at all, but here's my mum's recipes. Or he has this author that knows these recipes, has cooked the cakes and can speak from experience. And believe me, I've heard of some of the rigor that cooks use to do one cake 47 times before they put anywhere near a recipe book to be authentic. So that knowledge comes from that cook's mind. So where did that cook get that information from? He did not have a vision about it. He did not have a dream. He's not making it up. He's not speculating. And Einstein the same. If Einstein hasn't yet proved what he thinks is true, he better shut his mouth until he's confident. So Einstein did not have a dream about E equals mc squared. He did not have a vision. It was not revealed from on high. He did not just make it up. That would be disgraceful. We know that Einstein or the cook, it's come from their own direct experience. And that's the Buddha. That's the Buddha. That's exactly what the Buddha is. So every word that is valid Buddhism, and you better check because there are loads of rubbish published, and every second American or Australian or British person, we fancy smarty pants Western people, think we can make up whatever we like. We can go to one weekend course and you get some kind of vision and you write a book about it. I mean, we're so rude, you know, because we don't value spiritual knowledge. We just think it's something, I'm allowed to think what we like, we say. I mean, we're so arrogant, you know. So Buddha, this person, this Indian gentleman who lived 2,500 years ago, every word of Buddhism can stem back to him. And so basically, there's different views, as we know, there's different teachings in Buddhism, but the Mahayana view, which is the entire path, which is the one we're describing here, every word that's there, like Einstein, basically Einstein looked, and this is the point now, he looked at the world. Einstein looked at the world according to his degree of ability with his mind, and he took and he observed things, he then articulated what he saw, he codified them as laws, and then he proved them, and then he presented them. And he said, this is what I found to be true. Here's my methodology. If you want to know the same thing, over to you, baby, you take it. He's not asking you to believe him. He's absolutely not telling us to believe him. That would be too shocking for words. And Buddha is identical. He said, now I've used my mind, but we have to first look what the mind is, because it's very different from Einstein's view of the mind, very different from the modern view of the mind. He says, I've used my mind, and this is what I observe to be true. And so here's my methodology. And if you'd like to achieve the same result, become a Buddha, then over to you, baby. It's up to you. So therefore, in that sense, belief in Buddhism isn't useful. It's helpful. You need to believe Einstein if you want to start studying with him, but you check on his reputation. You check that other people have also proven it, so it gives you confidence. And then you've got to have some real confidence, confide, with trust. You've got to trust that Einstein's reasonable, having checked, then you make it your own experience. But to merely believe something, this is demented for the Buddha. You never say, oh, I believe in mathematics. You might, and it's good enough because lots of people know it and you can get away with it. But if your mummy says, go buy me 5 oranges, you're in trouble because you don't know mathematics. This is the crucial point. And this is why His Holiness the Dalai Lama all the time suggests that we study, tells us you've got to study this stuff. But we, unfortunately, in our culture, love belief, and we conflate liking Buddhism with knowing it. This is a big mistake, you know. And we think it's good enough to like it. I love Buddhism. I love the Dalai Lama. I believe in karma. I don't care if you believe in it. It's not enough to believe in it. It's not enough. It won't help you to believe in it. It won't help you to believe in it. It's better than nothing. At least you believe in somebody who's reasonable. But it's not enough. You won't get far. Nothing will change inside you. And that's the thing that we do also find hard to kind of get Buddha's point. You've got to do some work. You've got to turn yourself into this outrageously amazing person. That's the proof of the pudding. So to hear even, the goal of being a Mahayana Buddhist, the end result, where you graduate as a Buddha. And it's so helpful. The Lamas just mention this often in passing, but it's so profound. It's so tasty. The epistemology, what do you say there? The etymology of the word, Buddha, Buddha, and Sangye, the Tibetan equivalent, is so delicious. It tells us exactly the result, and then it implies the methodology. Buddha implies the utter eradication from our mind of all fear, all ego grasping, all attachment, all anger, all the 84,000 ridiculous misconceptions and delusions that Buddha has mapped out in the mind that are the source of all our suffering and the cause of why we harm others. And he has found from his own direct experience that they're not at the core of our being, they're adventitious, and they can be removed. And his entire methodology is about that. The second thing, not only that can we do on the Mahayana path, the second syllable implies the development to perfection of the other stuff in our mind. Love, intelligence, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, bliss, you name it, the nice stuff. This is the meaning of the word Buddha. This is implied. Okay, if we started to listen to the qualities of a Buddha, it sounds like science fiction, and we'll discuss this at some point. But that's so delicious. So if we can remove from our mind all those neuroses, and if we can develop to perfection all the goodness, it is obvious we had better learn to know what the mind is, and therefore we better learn to know what the techniques are. Because and we have to think, well, why would I want to get rid of attachment and anger and fear and drama? Well, guess what Buddha says? They're totally disturbing. They make you utterly miserable, and they cause you to make a complete mess of your life, not to mention going from life to life to ridiculous lifetimes, the big picture point of view. So, he's found that they're not intrinsic. They're not at the core of our being. They do not define us. Now, psychologically speaking, if we compare with neuroscience and psychology today, that's a demented presentation. It's like absurd. We can't even imagine a person who has no attachment, no anger, no jealousy, no fear. It just seems like superstition. Because why? Because we assume they are normal parts of a normal person, so normal that you'd be abnormal if you didn't have them. That's an absolute assumption in all our neuroscience and psychology. I mean, we tried cutting out bits of the brain back in the 30s, didn't we? Lobotomies or something. We saw it didn't work. So we don't know what this means. You can get rid of all anger, all attachment. You can have infinite love, infinite wisdom, infinite compassion all the time. It just sounds like science fiction, but that's exactly what Buddha is saying. And I find it's very encouraging to hear that's the end result of all this arcane stuff, Wow, that's it. Very delicious. I'm looking forward to it. So then, okay, so Buddha is this person. I can't say much about his history. I don't know much about his history, but I know he was born in India, and he was, this Hindu. They didn't call it that then, but that's what he went through, the amazing system that was existing at the time. He went through all these teachers after teachers after teachers. He was this prince, and all these stories about how he was looking for the causes of suffering, blah, blah, blah. So he gave up his life and went off. And then he finally, went as far as he could go, and then he went further, according to him. That's how he diverged in his own direction. Specifically, in relation to the nature, to his experiential findings about the nature of self, but also about the nature of the universe, how the actual ontological status of self and everything else. Right? That's how when Buddhism grew. Okay. So now, Atisha's or Tsongkhapa's, first level of practice. Before I say all this, basically what we're trying to do if we're a Buddhist is learn to know Buddhism is a viewpoint about how things exist. Essentially that. It's a viewpoint. It's Buddha's viewpoint. What's Christianity? It's Jesus Christ's viewpoint of how the universe exists. What's communism? It's Lenin or Marx's viewpoint about how the world exists. What's, science? It's various people's viewpoint about how things exist. There are many viewpoints on this planet. I mean, Australian Aboriginals have such an esoteric, unusual, I can't even comprehend when I hear about their viewpoint, this dream time, whatever they talk about. It's completely fascinating, Everywhere you go on the planet, since you've had human beings since beginningless time, you're going to have humans coming up with their viewpoint about how things exist. How marvelous can we do that? We can use our intelligence, Well, here we're describing Buddhas, and here we're describing Buddhas specifically coming from the tradition that I've studied in, which is His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all his mob, as we say in Australia, all the Tibetan Lamas, the Tibetan tradition, not just the Tibetan one, but the Gelugpa tradition, Tsongkhapa's tradition. So there's all these different approaches. So that's the approach, that's the teachings I've received. So these are basically all viewpoints. They're all viewpoints about the universe. Now, the interesting point that Buddha makes is this. And we learn more about the mind when we get to middle scope, high school. He's saying that there are this is the mind that we're discussing, there are some viewpoints. Everything's a viewpoint. Everything that comes out of our mouth is the sound that expresses a viewpoint. So he says some viewpoints are ridiculous, demented, delusional, have no relationship to reality whatsoever, and they are the ones that cause us suffering, and they're called delusions and disturbing emotions and a whole bunch of different levels of those. There's a bunch of viewpoints. For example, Buddha would argue with great clarity in the text, and there's extremely detailed debates about it argues with the presentation of a creator. He argues about the presentation of a soul or a self, or the Greeks call it like an essence. He has these detailed debates about these. He would suggest that this is a mistake. He's not being rude. He's telling you from his own direct experience that viewpoint is mistaken viewpoint. And what he means by a mistaken viewpoint is it's not in sync with reality. Buddha's trip is to see reality. He talks like this. So he's giving us his viewpoints. He says, don't believe me, go check it yourself. I'm either right or I'm wrong. As the Dalai Lama said, if you track along, if you're going one step at a time using Buddha's methodology, trying to internalize Buddha's viewpoints, which essentially is what you're doing as a Buddhist, you're trying to internalize his viewpoints, not blindly, you're trying to make sense of them, and you find at a certain point in your progress that actually he's wrong, of course you must reject him. This is the rigor we need to use in practice, not just blindly believe what everyone tells you. We love doing that. So everything's viewpoint. So then Buddha would argue with Mary. I mean, first of all, he's got emotional delusions, of these emotional afflictions, as we talk. We'll go to that in high school, that are viewpoints, but are ridiculously mistaken. And then you've got literally philosophical viewpoints. Buddha would argue with the creator. He'd argue with the brain. Absolutely, he would discuss and say the brain is not the mind. He's not being rude. no way, but he's presenting what his view of the mind is. The Indians would agree with that too. He talks about, the law of karma, for example, is completely the presentation coming from these Indians and articulated in a way with the Buddha. This is a viewpoint about what happiness is and what suffering is and how you use this. And this is where the junior school entry level grade 1 is abiding by the laws of karma. So that's the first one we're going to start discussing. This viewpoint of the Buddhas about how things exist, about how things happen. So being a Buddhist, basically you're training yourself to replicate the thoughts of a Buddha. And that's the view. So you're learning to first intellectually learn those, and then you slowly debate them, think about them, contemplate them, and slowly through subtle meditation, which we'll talk about, eventually the penny will drop and you'll get a direct experience of that truth. Or you'll find he's wrong. There's only two options. And I find this is very interesting with Buddhist philosophy. And I didn't study all those people, those Greeks and things, but I did hear something about the Socratic approach, which is this idea which we like very much in our culture, which you learn all these different philosophical views and you have a very open mind and you listen to them, but there's no end to them. There's no such concept in that Socratic approach, is what I understand. If I'm wrong, please correct me, where you learn to become that philosophy and you live it and it becomes truth. That's weird. That's like no end. You'd go mad. Well, for the Buddha, the only reason to learn his viewpoints about how reality is, philosophy, epistemology, whatever, is so that you can internalize it and you can become, you'll be in sync with reality. There'll be no longer a disconnect between what you see and how things exist. This is what wisdom is in Buddhism. This is what wisdom is. Getting in touch with reality. So, but because we live at this grossest level of mind right now, let's talk about the mind, because this is fundamental for the Buddha, to know at least theoretically what the mind is. In fact, one of the first teachings, Lama Zopa, when he started teaching the Lamrim and Kopan, he would in one presentation, he'd talk about the nature of mind and how it's beginningless and how it's not physical. And that's crucial for us materialists. I mean, when we hippies started hearing Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa teach, you've got to know what the mind is from their point of view, because it's fundamentally different from our point of view. So it's crucial for us modern people who have an assumption that the brain is the mind. So, okay, what is the mind then for the Buddha? Because if that's what becomes a Buddha, you better know what it is, baby. So the mind, the word mind in Buddhism is used synonymously with the word consciousness, broadly speaking. First point. Second point, with certainty for the Buddha, it is not physical. It is not specifically the brain. So this is not trying to insult these brilliant neuroscientists. It sounds so simplistic. But I think the best way to say what the brain is, for the Buddhist approach, it's a physical indicator of what's going on in the consciousness. It's a physical indicator of what's going on in the consciousness, in the mind. So mind and consciousness are used broadly, synonymously. So first, it is not physical. We take that as a hypothesis here. Second, it's got these far more subtle levels of cognition. The job of mind is to cognize. Cognize what, Buddha? That which exists, baby. That's omniscience. That's the wisdom of a Buddha. So mind has these far more subtle levels of cognition. And in order to even posit the possibility that you can have clairvoyance and past lives and see them and blah, which of course is what he's saying, you've got to posit the possibility that there are subtler levels of cognition. The brain evidently can't do that. Conceptuality is not capable of that. Your sensory consciousness is not capable of that. So we have to posit the possibility that Buddha, and indeed these genius Indians before him, have accessed and unpacked and unraveled and become intimately familiar with and learned about and presented about what the mind is at a subtle level. This is fundamentally necessary. There's much subtler levels of cognition. These Indians, well before the Buddha, discovered this with this genius single-pointed concentration skill that they cultivated, The third point about the mind, which is pretty shocking for whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or a materialist, a philosophical materialist, is your mind is not given to you by somebody else. Your brain, no problem. It comes from mummy and daddy. It's your body. Your body comes from mummy and daddy, not a problem. Your genes, your DNA, the chemicals, the brain, all of this for sure comes with your parents. But because we conflate brain with the qualities of mind, then we assume our mind comes from mummy and daddy. Our anger comes from mummy and daddy. And this is fundamental. And it takes a while for us Westerners, or people who are scientifically minded, it takes a while to squeeze our brains to get to hear this point. It really does. Because we so assume. And it's evident. My body came out of my mother's womb. It began with an egg and a sperm from mummy and daddy. This we can prove, but that's not your consciousness, baby. So the other view that's quite shocking for Christian and Muslim people, there's no role of a creator. It's a bizarre idea for the Buddha to think that you can be given the essential component of you. They call it a soul. The Greeks call it an essence. The Hindus call it an atman, a self. There's no view like this in Buddhism. Mind is not the handiwork of somebody else. This is the weirdest idea for the Buddha, I tell you. The mind is not physical. Not even one atom of your mind is physical. It has got these far more subtle levels. It's got this insane potential to be rid of all the rubbish and full of all the goodness. And so then where does it come from? Pretty reasonable question. Well, where did it come from? Well, it doesn't come from a creator. It does not come from mummy and daddy. It is not a function of the brain or in any way physical. And it can't come from nothing. Nothing can come from nothing. It's a nutty idea. You know, the law of cause and effect, which we're going to go into in junior school. We're going to start going today, obviously. We'll do that. First scope. The law of cause and effect runs the universe. For the Buddha, this is a natural law. He calls it the law of karma. It's the law that plays out in the lives and minds of all beings, of all universes, since beginningless time. It's got nothing to do with him. He's not a creator. He doesn't own it. He's got no copyright on it. He didn't create it or invent it. And that's the major difference in Buddhism. In this sense of the big universe, the universal truths, there's no equivalent of God's law. There's no equivalent. There are Buddha's laws, like, some of the vows that developed, the Buddha came up with when his disciples started living together, but they're conventional regularly. But in terms of the universe, fundamental laws, for the Buddha, there is only natural law. This is such a powerful point to comprehend. There's only natural law, There's no such thing as Buddha's law. He doesn't own anything. He's not a creator. This really takes us time because we just assume karma as an alternative to Jesus' teachings, coming from some person on high. Not like that. Or we assume it's punishment and reward. But there's no punisher and there's no rewarder in Buddhism because there's no creator. So we've got to think these things through because we have these assumptions, even when we're Buddhist, very deep in our bones. So you don't blame your Jewish mother or your Catholic mother for these things. These are the view of this dualistic view of blame and punishment and reward and naughty and good and all this. They're views of the ego grasping. They're views of our delusions. We made up these ideas, So this law of cause and effect, broadly, we all know this. We're geniuses at the law of cause and effect in our culture. We call it science. We know that whatever exists at this millisecond in time came from a series of causes before. And we learn those causes very rigorously. We call it science. Buddha's, the same level of rigor and discipline and clarity is what Buddha demands to understand the laws of the universe and even more specifically your own mind, the cognizer of these laws, So these are natural laws. I remember, and I always quote this, my Jesuit priest friend. I asked him, by definition, what is a sin? He said, by definition, a sin is doing what God said not to do. Now, that's completely reasonable if you posit a creator. It's correct. He's the boss. And you do what he says. And he has the power to punish and reward all these different views we have. We just put that into Buddhism too. It's insulting. We don't think it through enough. There's no equivalent. You read the Buddhists, they seem more fundamentalist than the most fundamentalist Baptist. I tell you, you read the Tibetans, they're so fundamentalist in how they talk. You can be forgiven for thinking it's not fundamentalist, punishment and reward. They have all these analogies like the Lord of Death and all these kinds of things. They're just kind of creative ways they talk. But when you strip all away that stuff, it's this bare bones, fundamental natural law. Everything is natural law, It just occurs. So this priest said, by definition, a sin is doing what God said. There's some aspect of natural law. So killing is wrong because people don't like it. There is that. But the real reason it's negative, what defines it as negative, this is such a powerful point, is the fact that God said not to do it. And that's totally appropriate if you have faith in a creator. But Buddha has got nothing to do with it. It's only natural law for him. So when Jesus says, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, why not? Because God said. Buddha says, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Why not? Guess what, baby? Because it's an action. It's first of all, a gross negative action, a heavy negative action. It's something that harms another. So it's called a negative action because it harms another. But Buddha, and this is now junior school, getting to it. I'm trying to go in order, but it's very difficult for me. At the level of karma, which in the Lamrim is like the final stages of junior school, but I'm leaping to it a little bit here. I'm going to go back to the earlier stages first, which lead us incrementally to the conclusion of junior school. The conclusion of the lowest scope is where you learn to abide by the laws of karma. Buddha gets us, he primes our mind to get ready to want to do that. But the essence of junior school is to abide by the laws of karma. The essence of junior school is to control your body and speech and don't harm others. This is the essence of junior school. And all the different points which I'm going to talk about will lead up to this. They culminate in the practice of karma, which is the end stages, the final bit of junior school. So the essence of this view of the Buddha, this law that he has observed, that runs the universe, within which the universe runs. And that means the physical world and all the trillions upon trillions upon trillions of sentient beings. The mind possesses. The word in Tibetan for sentient being, I think is a lovely term. It's a much better translation. Literally, it's mind possessor. Semchen, a mind possessor. And as far as the Buddha is concerned, there are trillions and trillions of these mind possessors. And therefore trillions of consciousnesses. They do not come from a creator. They cannot come from nothing, because everything that exists has to have a previous series of causes. Otherwise it's the chicken and egg business, you know. And of course, so this is the mind, it doesn't come from mummy and daddy. It's not physical. It does not come from a creator. So, you know, if you're a materialist, you track yourself back to mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, and the monkeys. If you're a Christian, you track yourself back to God. But what if you're a Buddhist? Well, you track yourself back, it's really simple, to previous moments of that very consciousness, which of course is not physical. So it's got subtler levels. So if you track yourself back from now, you'll track yourself back in an unbroken chain of mental moments. There's your physicality, you go back and back and back, the physical, and then the physical and the mental are intimately connected. And we'll go into this in more detail when we go to high school, about the relationship between the physical and the mental. And then you track your mind back. Every second, this second in mind of cognition comes from the previous, which comes from the previous, which comes from the previous. And if you had perfect memory, you'd track yourself in an unbroken chain of mental moments. You'd get back to the first second of conception. And then what about the moment before conception? Well, the moment before conception, egg was in mummy's body, sperm was in daddy's body, creator has nothing to do with it. And you track your consciousness back at a subtle level to a previous moment. And the Buddha would say that a few weeks before that, it was in a previous body. All this is dealt with in great depth in the teachings on karma, and certainly on the death process, which we'll be discussing in the high school level. So consciousness goes back and back. And then, of course, the big question we have is, when did it begin? This is one of the most common asked questions. Well, for the Buddha, it's a non-question. It's a silly question. How can you have a first moment? By definition, you cannot possibly have a first moment. It is a ridiculous nonsense. But we have these delusions in the mind, Buddha says, that have this assumption. So as His Holiness in his wonderful conversations with the scientists, as he said one time, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. Because we're trying to find the first moment. Even psychologically we do this. You go to your therapist and we're desperately searching back like for a needle in a haystack. When was it that started? What was the thing that happened that began your crazy mind, Robina, that began your anger, that began your depression, that caused you to choose such cumming boyfriends? What was it? We're determined you're going to search for it, as I said, like a needle in a haystack, and you'll find it back there somewhere. No, don't be ridiculous, Buddha says. You can't, by definition, find a first moment, not only of the mind, but this is the view of Buddhism, of even the universe. Not possible. Not possible. And this is the nuttiest thing we've ever heard. It just blows our mind. We utterly assume there has to be a first moment. Utterly. I've no idea what all the scientists say. I do not know. I haven't studied science. But I can't get my head around it. Experientially, I don't have the memory, but conceptually for me, this is a really sound idea. As mad as it sounds, that our consciousness is beginningless. I mean, it's like it's laughable, you know. So that, I mean, the implication of this is so profound for Buddhists. And it implies our practice. Because if my mind is mine, and it came from my past mind, and what's in it, and the law of karma, which we're going to talk about later, is that everything I think and do and say programs this mind, then this ownership is the main experiential consequence of having this view of karma. It's really profound. It's ownership. To think that your mother made you is like a joke. She might have been a creep, I'm not arguing, but she ain't the main cause of your suffering, baby. And she ain't the main cause of your happiness. So this is the mind. It's not physical. It goes to the subtlest level. It's got this outrageous potential. It is not the handiwork of mummy, daddy, or a creator. No way. And it's beginningless. And indeed, the Mahayana would say it's endless. Now, the Theravadan teachings, if you study in Burma or Thailand, they're going to tell you that most of us only have the potential to graduate at high school, to achieve our liberation, our nirvana, once we've cut the root of all suffering by realizing emptiness. And then when you die in that life, when you've accomplished your nirvana, when you die in that life, you're gone, baby. There's not a puff of smoke left of you. You're finished. There's nothing left. You know, that's nihilism as far as the Mahayana view is concerned, or as His Holiness politely said one time, we Mahayanists have a problem with that. Because the Mahayana view is mind by definition is endless, which might sound depressing, because we think we want to get the hell out of this mess. But delusions can be ended. This is what's so delicious. So we're all mind possessors. Now, the bigger picture point of view in Buddhism, and this is where, if you really understand the Lamrim very well, we will learn about the big picture of all the different realms of existence. So I think there's a way of presenting the Lamrim, which is what I tend to do, is just to do with this life, and it works. It's so delicious, it's so experiential. We can describe all the levels of suffering in this way, but the bigger picture is more vast than merely this life. So here, you know, okay. So what time is it? 9 o'clock. Okay, 8 o'clock for you people. So I'm just saying a few basics, a few things. What is the mind? What its you know, what its potential is, Buddha's view about continuity of consciousness, beginningless mind, all these crazy things, all these interesting points, which is a starting point, because we're discussing from here all the way to Buddhahood, we're discussing the mind, so we better realize we're not talking about the brain. So maybe before I go further, any questions about terms, definitions, concepts that I've discussed so far? Because I'm going to unpack all this the next few weeks, you know. Are there any questions? Who's the question person? Mary Ellen?
Steve will field the questions. If you have a question you want to put in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself or raise your hand.
Anybody got a question? Nobody? That's fine. Don't have to have. Okay, we'll keep going. Because we're 90 minutes, aren't we? 90 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, so the essence of junior school, lower scope, the essence of it is controlling your body and speech, which is the essence of the law of karma, which is the culmination of the various techniques that I'll go through that end up at, as I said, culminate in the practice of karma. That's where you start to put your money where your mouth is. That's when you begin to practice. But Buddha gets us, Atisha and Tsongkhapa get us to a series of other ideas to prime our minds to even want to start to abide by the laws of karma. The essence of the next level, middle scope, is to control your mind. The essence of university, compassion wing, is to cultivate compassion. And then to complete wisdom, to complete the wisdom wing there. So first level of practice, control your body and speech. Next level, control your mind. That's the wisdom wing. And this is the nuts and bolts of Buddha's teachings about karma and Buddha's teachings about the mind, Buddhist psychology. This is the nuts and bolts of the work, the nuts and bolts of all of Buddha's instructions and methods and blah, blah, that we would use to help us put ourselves together to become this amazing, stable person. Not completed the job yet, but it's all about ourselves. So the emphasis in the wisdom wing, the emphasis in junior school and high school, is to stop your suffering. The main emphasis is to give up suffering. to stop suffering. So the essence of the realization is called renunciation. It's called renunciation. That means giving up something. So what are you giving up? You're giving up suffering, and crucially, you've got to give up its causes. Giving up suffering and its causes. So, but unfortunately, when we anyway, never mind. But so, it sounds forbidding to us. I've got to give up something. And as Lama Zopa says, when we begin to hear about attachment, which we'll talk about, especially in middle scope, high school, we conflate pleasure and happiness with attachment. Certainly with our analysis in the modern world, we don't have a proper analysis, I'd suggest. And so when we hear that we've got to give up attachment, as Lama Zopa says, we go, oh, you mean I've got to give up my heart? I've got to give up my happiness, which is how we can really grossly misrepresent Buddha's instructions if we just do it superficially. When you can walk around looking like with a long face, looking all depressed. Would you like some tea, Robina? Oh, no, I've got renunciation. Would you like to have would you like a coffee? No, thank you. You totally become a boring person. That's not renunciation. The consequence of renunciation is you become this marvelous, happy, joyful, stable, disciplined, self-respectful human being. I mean, that sounds delicious. So, the essence of the first level of renunciation, which is junior school, is you're going to control your body and speech. Now, you've got to ask yourself why. You've got to ask, don't just do it because, it's a good thing to do, not to kill and not to steal. Because if you listen to Buddha's 10 little things, it's like Jesus' his 10 little things. A bit different. So we assume it's the same. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. We never bother asking why not. Well, Christians, because God said, baby, that's the main reason. Buddha, because guess what, Robina? Everything you do and say and think, precious girl, programs your mind and sows seeds in your mind that will ripen as your future experiences. You're your own creator, honey. So the reason behind Buddha exhorting us not to kill and steal and lie and jump on the wrong partner isn't even because it harms another. It's defined as an action that harms another. But the reason he exhorts us not to do it is because it'll harm me. This takes time, and this is something we in the modern world, in the West, we gloss over it. We just think, oh no, that sounds selfish. Oh, I shouldn't do it just for that reason. Because you don't understand, we've got to get renunciation. We miss that completely in our culture. We kind of think it's all about compassion, but compassion's university, baby, I'm sorry. So to understand what's driving the instructions in junior school and high school, the wisdom wing, is to protect us from further suffering. That's the fundamental principle behind every single instruction, recommendation, recommended practice of the Buddhas at that level. So the first level, we're trying to control our body and speech. And the next level, high school, having harnessed to some degree our crazy body and speech, the slaves of our delusions, as Lama Zopa calls, put them under control. We now have the luxury to go to high school and we can start getting some concentration and learn Buddha's model of the mind and unpack and unravel and deconstruct this mind of ours. And this is where we become a Buddhist. The first level of practice, the essence of which the junior school is morality, ethics, that's shared by good communists, good Hindus, good Buddhists, good Christians, all agree. Be nice, don't harm others. So the unique approach of a Buddha, you become a Buddhist when you get to the middle scope, where you start to look into the mind, because this is where the Buddha's view of the mind is fundamentally different, like I'm saying, and his approach to it, that we've got this incredible potential to unpack and unravel it, to completely control it, to completely deconstruct it, and reconstruct it into the mind of a Buddha. Because we're not talking about the brain here. We're talking about the actual subjective cognitive process itself. This is being a Buddhist. This is where we become a Buddhist. As Lama Yeshe puts it, becoming our own therapist. And it's not just hippy trippy, cross your eyes and cross your legs or something and hope for the best. You have to talk about rigor and discipline and clarity. You can't imagine the level of brilliance of your rigor and discipline and clarity that we need, and depth of analysis to unpack and unravel and deconstruct this cognitive process of ours. This is being a Buddhist. And if we don't study Buddhist psychology, we don't study the texts that they teach in the monasteries, you will not do it. Because we put our own vague notions onto what we think attachment, anger, and so on and so forth are. Buddhism is so specific, I tell you. And it's a revelation when we start to study it and then start to put meat on the bones of our own practice, you know. And we're going to go into that. That's high school. All of the wisdom is about you, nothing to do with sentient beings. The essence of high school is, junior school and high school is back off and leave sentient beings alone and mind your own business. It's to stop harming them. Why? Because you want to stop suffering yourself. You stop harming yourself. So that it's caution. That's what Shakyamuni is. My nice Thai statue. Look, this is my little Zoom room here. That's Thai Buddha. Have a look at that, what it means. Look at the psychological implication of that statue. Completely subdued body, speech, and mind. That's the essence of the first scope and second scope, the essence of renunciation. Completely harness the energy of body, speech, and mind. And what's the consequence of that? Total bliss. Not boring, bliss. And we'll talk about all these things. So, okay, the Lam Rim begins, given that we're trying to control our body, speech, and mind, then given we're trying to get compassion, it starts with a teacher very cautiously with a preliminary practice that he wants us to start to contemplate before we even enter into junior school. So that's why he talks about we should start to contemplate this precious human rebirth. So what's behind that little contemplation, which is the first one in the Lam Rim? It's a preliminary practice before we enter into actually beginning the junior school work. Because, you know, he says we're bone lazy, and if we can just look a little bit and do some market research and check around the world, even just in the human realm, and recognize, wow, you know, I'm like one of the 1%, not the 1% rich baby, the 1% fortunate. So he's getting us to do some market research, Atisha. And of course he's talking about not being born in the other realms as well, but forget those. But just if we compare our life, the quality of our life, the quality of our sanity, the quality of our possessions, and the reasonable conditions we have, the reasonable politics, we mightn't think so at this moment in time. I refuse to look at the newspaper today until I wake up tomorrow morning. I couldn't bear the pain. Have people been watching the paper? You've been checking your iPhone while you're listening, seeing what the numbers are? Anyway. So we can compare, you know, I think we'd be in the 1%. This is not a joke. In 1%, in what terms? Fortunate. Fortunate in what sense? That we've got a reasonable body, reasonable health, reasonable job, reasonable access to reasonable things, kind friends, some kind of intelligence, not completely berserk, some sense of, you know, got a bunch of, I mean, Atisha listed as 18 different points. They're into their little bullet points, you know. There are 18 different things, some of which we've got and some of which we've avoided not having, which is really, so it sums up as we've got a really fortunate life, this precious human rebirth, they say. Now, we kind of go, yeah, all right, yeah, you know, we don't think that. We wake up every day and go, oh God, me again, you know, I'm so miserable, I'm so depressed, I'm so angry, I've got no job, I've got no this, I'm fat, I'm ugly. All we do is see the miserable things. Well, a teacher tries to perk us up and get to see we've got these marvelous conditions. So the conclusion from this, the action point, is don't waste it, babe. That's what he tries to get us to do from contemplating these little points about this precious human rebirth. Now, I know when I first heard this, I didn't know what the hell Lama Zopa was talking about. What's he telling me all this for? Who cares, you know? It's to make ourselves wake up and realise don't waste this precious life. There's no logic to it yet. There's no talk about karma yet. None of that. It's just you've got a good opportunity. Then don't waste it, babe. That's the conclusion. That's the action point to come from contemplating this precious human rebirth. Just compare with the rest of the world, you know, the humans. I mean, of course, the teacher goes into the fact that we're not an animal and not in the hell realms and not in the spirit realms. That's even more abstract for us. Just comparing with humans, we can go, wow, aren't I fortunate? And have the humility to think, I better not waste it. That's the very first contemplation that Atisha gets us to think about. And then he gets us to enter into, now that causes us to want to go to the next step, which is entering into the first level, first practice, junior school, entry level, grade 1, the next little point in junior school that leads on from this automatically. Well, given that this life is precious, now he gets us right between the eyeballs, and now he starts to get us to contemplate impermanence. Now, impermanence, the way they describe it in Buddhism, is this philosophy, this vast view dealt with in great depth in the literature about the reality of this universe is that there's nothing set in stone. Everything changes moment by moment. Everything is impermanent. All the universe is and this is, we kind of know it, but it's dealt with incredible depth of the literature. And Buddha talks about gross impermanence, which is fairly evident. Lamps break, computers die, husbands leave you. And then, but there's subtle impermanence. This is the real teachings in Buddhism. The incredible talk about subtle impermanence that's so delicious that we can easily mistake it for emptiness. And it's very powerful teaching that can lead you to realize emptiness, to think about subtle impermanence. And that can only be done in meditation, because it's so subtle. But Atisha doesn't worry about that here, because it's all very fascinating. He wants us to get us between the eyeballs. He wants us to get a wake-up call. That's his agenda. So he wants us not only to, once we recognize this life is precious, then he gets us to start realizing, well, guess what, honey? You're going to die. So he gets us to think about the impermanence of death. Not someone else's, you, baby. So then there's 3 points there, 3 essential points, and each of them has got 3 separate points. There's all these bullet points. I'm just going to put the essence on all of them, you know. So he gets us to contemplate this next little step, to prime our mind. He's moving us incrementally, gradually, step by step, where we culminate junior school in finally deciding I better start putting my money where my mouth is, and I better start practicing good ethics. This is leading us to it. It's priming our mind. So this next step he wants us to give us a wake-up call, increase our wake-up call, that this precious life will end at some point. So he wants us to start to think about this. So the first point is, he wants us to think about how death is definite. So we'll go, yeah, all right, I know that. Give me something more intelligent. Yeah, what do I do with that? And this is something now we have to really discuss. When Atisha or Tsongkhapa tells us these things, he's giving us a way to think, isn't he? He's describing from his own experience that he has observed that the entire universe is the nature of change. So we know it superficially, but he wants us to go into much more detail, especially the subtle impermanence. It's really fascinating. So he's telling us his viewpoint. He's telling us his observations. So then we think we're told that we're supposed to meditate on this. And then we go, well, how do I meditate on death? We get so confused. So I think I've got to stop here about impermanence, and now I've got to talk about meditation, because we have so many, we've only got 15 minutes left, but never mind, we can carry on next week. We've got so many weird misconceptions about meditation. But it's okay. Buddha doesn't own it. He's got no copyright on it. He's not the boss. He didn't make it up. But if you want to do Buddhist meditation, you better know what he's talking about, okay? Don't just put our own trip on it. It's so rude, you know? So basically, there are 2 modes, and you don't learn this till high school, not even properly. We really learn it properly when we get to the Bodhisattva path. But it is a high school teaching. It's a Hinayana teaching in its nature. Concentration, in fact, it's a Hindu teaching. Single-pointed, so there's 2 modes of meditation, Buddhist view of meditation. Hundreds of types of meditation. The first mode is known as calm abiding. It's the name given for the end result of the technique when you've accomplished it. Or more broadly, single-pointed concentration, made up by these genius Indians, you know. So, then the second mode of meditation, which is the point, the entire point of even having single-pointed concentration, is so that you can accomplish the second, which is known in terms of its result, and it's known as insight, or special insight. In Sanskrit, vipassana. The first one is Sanskrit is shamatha, calm abiding, the end result when you've accomplished concentration. The second one, the end result, is insight. Now, Lord Buddha taught a whole bunch of vipassana techniques, but the one that's generally known in the world, almost like its own separate Buddhist religion almost, is known as vipassana. And there's a particular technique, and I've never done it, but I've heard about it, where Lord Buddha gets us to concentrate on the basis of concentration, the first mode. You now go to the second mode, and he wants you to get some insight into something. And what he wants you to get insight into in this particular technique is insight into the reality that everything changes. So what he gets us to do is use concentration, the first mode, to check to check the sensations in the body. I've heard about it. I've never done it. Some of you might have done it. So what he wants us to get insight to isn't the body. Many people think we're trying to get insight into the body. Buddha couldn't care less about the body, for God's sake. He wants us to get insight into impermanence. That is what will come as a result of scanning the experiences of the body, that things change. This is a delicious technique to help us get insight into impermanence. Now, the Buddha wants us to get insight into karma, insight into perfect human rebirth, insight into the suffering of the lower realms, insight into every single thing in his entire path to enlightenment. Insight is a delicious word in English. In some languages I notice there's no real word for it, and so they use these weird religious words, and they're so peculiar. So we fantasize what insight means. And when we hear it normally, we don't understand it. But you check, it's the most delicious word. You're thinking through a problem and you go, oh, in your life, I got a bit of insight into that problem, Now I understand what's going on. So insight is a lovely word for understanding something experientially, that's all. But because we hear it as a type of meditation, and then we have a vague idea that meditation is sitting there with your eyes closed and your legs crossed and looking all kind of, holy, we get confused about what insight is. Now, if you're a Tibetan Buddhist, you're going to read in all the Lamrim, you're going to read that the second mode of meditation is often referred to as analytical meditation. And we get really confused now. We get so confused. That seems like an oxymoron, So the word meditate is very interesting in Tibetan. It's the verb to familiarize. To familiarize yourself with something, that is the meaning of the word to meditate. Now that really throws us, because we're so convinced that meditation is where you have to, is the first mode, that is all the meditation is, to sit down, cross your eyes, close your legs, whatever you do, other way around, and to simply get some focus, get some concentration. We think that's meditation. So then we hear analytical meditation, we completely blow our minds. So the point is this. We do this process of these two modes of meditation all the time. When we learn anything, we just don't call it meditation. So I go to school, and Miss Holton at the convent, Miss Holton taught me that 1 + 1 was 2. Now, I'd never heard of such an unusual idea. I didn't know, but she told me to write it down. Write it down, Robina, and she would have said, go home and do your homework. We know that. So if she's going to be a Buddhist, what she would have said is this: Robina, I want you to go home. I want you to go to your little desk. I want you to close the door, keep the other brothers and sisters out of the way. I want you to do the first mode of meditation, and I want you to get some concentration. Because, honey, you can't realize anything if you don't have some concentration. So she would have got me to focus. Then once I've got my focus, she would then say, take out your notebook and look at these words and think them through. And guess what the conclusion would be? As an insight. And I'd go, oh, mummy, I get it. That's what an insight is. But she didn't say go meditate. She didn't say go get concentration. And she didn't say go and do some analytical meditation. She just said go do your homework. But implies if you can't concentrate, I didn't even have a desk. That's why I didn't do any homework. So I couldn't concentrate for more than 1 second. So I never, didn't learn anything. So you've got to have some concentration to do anything, including kill somebody. You better have some concentration. If you can't focus for more than a minute, you're all over the place. You're useless. So you've got to have focus first. And that's just the beginning. But we're so addicted to believing that that's meditation, this amazing wow. And it is amazing wow. But it's only the beginning. You've got this laser-like focus when you've accomplished it. And then you use that laser-like focus to go to the second mode, and you take whatever you've learned. You come home from your class about karma. You've come home, if we were proper little Buddhists like all the monks in the monasteries, like Lama Yeshe said they did, this class here, all the things you've heard here, you would have memorized it. You'd go home, you'd sit there, get some focus. After when we close the Zoom, you'd go to your little meditation cushion, you'd close your eyes, you'd get some concentration, and when you got some stability in your concentration, you go to the second mode, and you bring up in your notes or in your mind everything we've talked about tonight, and you would think it through logically, and then it might trigger an insight. That's what meditation's for. So the bottom line is we're trying to get insight into impermanence, insight into karma, insight into death, insight into everything in the entire path. So the special insight that's taught in the framework of the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva is insight into emptiness. That's the final one. But it's not the only insight. We've got to get insight into everything. And concentration meditation is the brilliant skill that we cultivate that enables us to get insight easily. Because you know when you can focus well, you can understand things. If your mind's all over the place, nothing penetrates. So it's practical psychology. Concentration is crucial. And then you use that focused mind to do the second mode of meditation, and you don't have to do it while you're sitting with your legs crossed. You can do it on the toilet, you can do it while you're walking, you can do it while you're driving. You can think it through logically and clearly, whatever it is you're learning to get an insight into. And that thinking process will trigger the insight. Oh, I get it. And then as your meditation deepens, the insights will deepen until eventually you have a direct non-conceptual, experiential insight into all these teachings. And that's when you're a Buddha, So that's a discussion about meditation. So we have to finish now. So why don't we just close our eyes and do 3 quality minutes of concentrating on our mind. This is the Lama Yeshe's Mahamudra teaching, and I'm going to bring this up when we get into the second scope. I'll bring up Lama's lovely book. And concentration meditation. We'll describe it using Rama's book. It's very delicious. So Mahamudra meditation is a way of realizing emptiness, getting insight into emptiness. But the first mode of meditation, concentration, you don't use a visualization as your object. You don't use the breath. The object to concentrate on, to do our best to concentrate on, is whatever thoughts pop up in our mind. So just be very natural for these last 3 minutes. And with determination, you're going to pay attention to whatever pops up in your mind. You don't conjure any thoughts. You don't wish they'd be there. You don't wish they wouldn't be there. You don't analyze them. You don't discuss them with yourself. You don't get involved in them. You let them come and you let them go. Just watch your thoughts with strong determination for 3 minutes. Pay attention to your thoughts. Just keep your attention sharp, just on the thoughts. Don't space out. Keep the mind sharp. All right, that's it. 3 quality minutes. Lama Yeshe had us do a whole retreat one time. He made us do 5-minute sessions. Because, often we think this meditation technique is relaxation. It's not. There's lovely relaxation techniques, but it's not this. You've got to train your mind to be super sharp. So we've got to watch like a hawk, So 3 minutes is really good quality. Catch your mind every second, So we think we've done an hour and a half, whatever we've talked about, something useful, I hope. A few seeds have gone in, or every second we've thought something, the seeds have gone in. How amazing. We're going to nourish these seeds from this moment, we think, by our practice, our efforts every day, till we meet again. Have you got the prayers there, Mary Ellen, or we just say the prayers out loud?
Steve can share them.
Okay. So the first one is just this, this English. I'll say the English, we'll do the Tibetan. So the meaning of it. So due to this virtue, what that means is because of this activity of being together for 90 minutes, all the thoughts we've had, all the seeds we've planted in our effort to try and understand Buddha's teachings, none of it's gone astray. It's one of the fundamental things about karma, which we're going to talk about. Nothing leaves the mind. Everything is stored there. Lama Zopa says like you're taking photos all day and storing. Nothing goes astray. So we think how marvellous, 90 minutes. We might remember most of what we've talked about. Doesn't matter. The seeds have gone in. So due to these positive thoughts we've had, these seeds we've planted, may I quickly become a Buddha, just like our teacher, and lead all suffering sentient beings, without exception, to that state. And then the second one, may this precious supreme bodhicitta, this aspiration, it's not compassion, it's the result of compassion, this outrageous paradigm shift in the mind, which is university, where others are now only the ones we think about because we've so developed ourselves to such a degree. So may the precious bodhicitta, not yet born in the minds of beings, may it arise, and may that which has not arisen, or may that which has arisen, not decline, but increase more and more in the minds of all. That'll do. Don't need to bend. Done. That's it. Thank you, Petals.